2 months ago, Kenya's inflation rate closed at 7.3% by month end, which was the lowest level in 14 months. But just before we could say Jack Robinson, it spiked again to what has now been recorded by September end as 6.8%. Now, this is coming as prices across various sectors have increased. Now, if you haven't noticed, this is very, very similar to what is happening in the West African country Nigeria, fully attributable to the removal of fuel subsidy. But the question is, what exactly is the reason for Kenya's inflation spike? Well, joining us to have this conversation, we have Dr. Iraki, Associate Professor, University of Nairobi. Dr. Iraki, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you and good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you too. It's a pleasure to have you join us. Dr. Iraki, what exactly would you say is the main reason for the spike in inflation?
I see quite a number of reasons why there's a spike in Kenya's inflation in the last few months. The first one is imported inflation. If you look at what happened in the US in the last 1 year or so, there was inflation. And the US government raised up the interest rates to stop inflation or to tame inflation. And by extension, the value of the dollar appreciated. And if the value of the dollar appreciated, the value of the Kenyan shilling depreciated. And Kenya being a net importer means that imports and other commodities, the price went up. That was one cause of inflation. The other one is what you just mentioned a few minutes ago, that the government removed fuel subsidies. So now we have the full market of fuel, oil and so on. And that has made the price of oil and gas go up. And since oil or petrol and other energy are a very big input in manufacturing, farming, and so on, the price of goods and services have gone up. And the other one is food. We haven't had very good rain for the last few months. And food is always a very big contributor to inflation in this country. And the last one, or the last but one, why inflation is going up is tax. The government has come up with a lack of tax in the last few months, and businessmen and entrepreneurs have factored that in their pricing. And that has made the price of goods and services go up. And the final one, people think that political sentiments are also causing up some inflation. The government is settling slowly, and until the government is settled economically, people tend to behave unnaturally by raising prices of goods and services. So some of the reasons why I think inflation is rising in Kenya.
All right. Now, what does this say about Kenya's economy generally, especially in this recent time?
That's an interesting question, because when President Ruto was campaigning to become the next president, he made a lot of economic promises. The price of food will go down, there will be more stability, the economy will grow. But I don't think he foresaw the headwinds that were coming along, like the war in Ukraine. He doesn't have control over things like rent, which has a very big impact on inflation. So I think the Kenyan economy is stabilizing, but it's stabilizing quite slowly. If you look at the last few years, the economic growth rate has been over 4%. So it has not grown as fast as expected, but despite all these hiccups, we see the economic prospects are bright, particularly when the political situation has stabilized.
Now, would we say that Kenya's economy is also stable enough on the global stage?
That's an interesting question, because if you look at what has been happening in the neighboring countries, for example, if you go to Sahel, or if you go to some countries in the south that have defaulted, or even your neighboring countries in West Africa that have not been able to pay their debts, they have defaulted. Kenya has not gone to that extent. We know the economy is under pressure, but so far the economy is holding, and we are hoping that with the prospects that we see in terms of the steps the government is making, or the steps individuals are taking, in terms of investment that is pouring into the country, we believe that the economic prospects are bright.
Okay, now I was going through the Kenya Economic Report of 2023, and the theme was majorly based on cost of living and the role of market. Now, in terms of cost of living and the role of market, how would you say that this generally affects the people of Kenya?
If I get your question right, if you look at, you talked about two things. One of them is the market.
Yes.
And one of the questions that is not very clear in terms of the government is that it's not very clear whether they are for market economy or more role of the government in the economy. So I think one of the things we are looking forward to is the government to come out very clear on whether it is for the market economy or whether it is from greater government control of the economy. And until that government or that issue is clear, people are still seeing a lot of fog in the economy. We hope it will be cleared as soon as possible so that we know exactly what the government stands for. What was the other question?
Just basically the cost of living and, of course, the market. So the cost of living for the people of Kenya.
Cost of living is actually what is on the streets, on the highways. Everybody is talking about the cost of living in this country because of the reasons I've given, particularly the new taxes. If you look at the Kenyan economy, 80% of the citizens are in the informal sector. They don't have a stable job. So anytime there is a rise in prices, they are disproportionately affected by that. And if there's something that is of concern to every Kenyan, whether rich or poor, it is a high cost of living. And they're asking for the government to do what it can. The government the other day said they cannot do anything about the cost of fuel prices, but they are trying to do some little things like subsidizing fertilizers, hoping that if you subsidize fertilizer, the production of food goes up, then the price of food can go down, and by extension, there can be less inflation, and the cost of living can go down. But for now, everybody is complaining about the high cost of living.
Okay. Now, we did mention earlier that there is a very huge similarity between what's going on in Nigeria currently and what's happening in Kenya. And front on the agenda for Nigerian government is the aim to increase foreign direct investment. So I want to ask, is it the same thing with Kenya when it comes to foreign exchange, import and export, direct investment? Is the government, majoring on that as much as they should at this point?
It's very interesting because whether you talk about Nigeria, whether you're talking about Chad, whether you're talking about Kenya, everybody is looking for foreign direct investment. But remember that investors are very proud people. They have a lot of choices. They can go to the Middle East, they can go to Asia, they can go to Africa. It depends on whether the conditions in the country where they want to invest in are good enough. So what the countries are doing, including Kenya, is to make the economy more friendly to investors. And the problem is you try to make the economy more friendly to investors, but there are other forces that are beyond your control. I don't think as an investor you want to come to invest in an economy where the prices are going up, where the inflation is going up, where people are not sure about tomorrow. So I think there's a similarity between the two economies, but we should understand that the problem that is bedeviling the two countries is not just internal but also external, because we don't have control over the interest rates in the US or in Ukraine. We don't have control over it. So there's a lot of similarity, but the foreign direct investments are very choosy, and we hope that African countries, Kenya or Nigeria, are going to improve the conditions so that more direct investment flows into these countries.
Now, some people would advise that there needs to be a leverage on the market. And by leverage, they mean not just physical now, but digital infrastructure, policy framework, legal framework, and so on. What is your take on that?
When we think about the foreign direct investment, I always compare Africa with China. When China opened up in 1978, everybody started pouring money into that country. And within 40 years, China has become a leading exporter of goods and services. So maybe that's the reason we need to run, that for the investors to come, we need to have the infrastructure in place. I don't think I want to be an investor that is going to worry about roads, about power, about internet, about current exchange. So we need to make our economy so conducive to investors that to leave Vietnam, to leave Southeast Asia and other countries and come here. But so far, I don't think African countries have done enough to attract investors. And all you need to do is to look at the headlines. What are the headlines about the economy in Nigeria? What are the headlines about the economy in Kenya? Some of the headlines are not very attractive to foreign investors. People talk about things like corruption. People think about the roads that are congested, the power that is not reliable. So we need to work harder to make sure that the conditions are conducive to investors, not just foreign investors, but even local investors.
All right. Talking about attracting foreign direct investment now, I would like to know, does Kenya have any strength or, anything that they can hold on to leverage on the global market?
Well, yes, I think one of the Kenya's biggest attractions when it comes to foreign direct investment is that we are a very innovative country. If you look at some of the innovation that have come from Kenya, particularly in the digital space, M-Pesa, online lending, and if you come to Kenya, you discover that things like internet are very reliable and very cheap. That is one area we have done very well. The other area where we can leverage on is our strategic location between the north and the south, between the east and west. And the most important the most important thing we can leverage on is the people of Kenya. Very resilient, very hardworking, very innovative, and people who are always ready to take the next step to improve their lives. If you look at most African countries, we don't have things like social security, but people still do what they can to improve themselves. So if under those conditions the government can come in and catalyze what people are doing, there's no reason we can not attract a lot of foreign direct investment. So we all have strategic advantages, but they must be made use of.
All right. Now, in countries that have fluctuating economy like this, most of the people that suffer or bear the brunt of the entire thing are the low-grade workers, the low-income earners. And so that brings us to talk about the minimum wage in Kenya. Is anything being done by the government to kind of ease the stress at this point?
From subsidizing things like fertilizer, the government has not done a lot to make sure that the ordinary people are not suffering. So the main reason is very simple. You can increase the wages, the minimum wage, like what I've seen happening in Nigeria, but when there is inflation and you increase the wages, inflation becomes worse. And I guess that's why the government is very reluctant to try and increase wages when there's inflation. But the government has been trying to look at subsidizing the supply side of the economy so that we have more production of food, we have better production of services, so that at the end of the day, we can make the economy more efficient, lower the cost of living, and make it more attractive to foreign investors and also local investors.
So with all of these things that we have said, do you think that Kenya is ready for a global economic shock?
That's a very hard question, because if I look at the history of this country, we have always been having shocks. And I can assure you that the Kenyan economy has been very robust. We went through the 2008 economic crisis, which was global. We went through the shock when Kanu was leaving power, the economy was doing very badly. We were able to recover from that. We went through COVID-19 and went through it. We went through a number of elections that were contested. The last year, 2022, and 2017. So I think when I look at those events and how the Kenyan economy has reacted, I think the Kenyan economy is to some extent ready for shocks. But the best reason why I think the Kenyan economy is ready for shocks is because an average Kenyan is very resilient. Whether the government is supporting him or not, we are very resilient people. So to that extent, I believe we are ready for shocks, not that we want any shocks. But I think we can handle them for now.
Hopefully there will be no shocks. Finally, I would like to ask, what do we see Kenya becoming in terms of the economy in the nearest foreseeable future?
If I look at Kenya in the next 5 years or so, maybe the next 10 years, if we put our politics in order, because that has always been our soft underbelly. If you look at the Kenyan economic growth, every time we go to the polls, there is always a slump. The economy goes down. Then after we settle politically, the economy goes up. But if we put our politics in order, I see no reason why the Kenyan economy cannot grow. I know there's some pains because of taxes, because of structural adjustments in the economy, because of the new government. We are not very sure whether we are going to be market economy, whether we are going to be government-controlled economy. We are not very sure whether we are going to face east or west. But if we resolve those few contradictions, I think the Kenyan economy is ready for takeoff, riding on our resilience and riding on our innovative capacity.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Iraki. I mean, it's funny how most of these African countries have similarities when it comes to their economy, you know, the fluctuations in economy, the challenges that they face. And it's hopeful to see that we don't think that this is the end. You know, there is no unsurmountable challenge that Africa cannot face if only we can harness our own resources and make the most out of it. Once again, I want to say a big thank you to you, Dr. XN Iraki, Associate Professor at University of Nairobi. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you and have a good afternoon.
It's a pleasure. All right, this is where we call it a wrap on Village Square Africa. Thank you for watching. And for more of these trending stories and analytics into these stories across the African continent, do well to tune in again as we bring you more episodes of Village Square Africa. Till then, stay tuned as the news comes up next. My name is Blessings Mosugu. Thanks for watching.